connected to your phone. I have this with my headphones.
It's so stressful, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I think all my students are here. So it's a great pleasure to introduce the amazing Henrietta Ward, who is a fantastic content designer. And students, without further ado, Henrietta, which will now present her amazing career.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me and for everyone taking their time to listen to my presentation about content design. It's something I'm really passionate about sharing. Oh, good. I'm just working out sharing. Sharing my screen as always. The forever issue of sharing screens. But we're good. We're sharing my screen, right? You can see it?
We can see it. Yes.
Okay, amazing. So thank you so much for taking your time to listen to me today. I'm Henrietta Ward. I'm a content designer. I'm currently working at Talabat. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my journey to content design. So how I got to where I am, how I ended up in content design. It's kind of an unconventional journey. And I think that's echoed a lot across content designers in general. And then I'll tell you what content design actually is. I know some of you probably have an understanding of it, maybe some others don't. So I'm going to do a deep dive into what content design is, and then finishing it off with a little case study of some work I've done that involves content design, and then a Q&A. So any questions that you have, write them down, take a note, and I'll get to them at the end. So I'm going to dive right in. So I actually began my career in theater. And then there's this gap in the middle, and then I ended up in content design. So how did I go from theater to content design? So I actually studied at NYU Abu Dhabi, which was an incredible experience, and was how I actually ended up in the UAE. And I studied theater theory with a minor in creative writing. And within theater theory, I really focused on something called performance studies, which is actually very heavily reliant on psychology. So it's a study of the day-to-day behavior of humans. So how we act, whether that's how we represent gender, how we represent race, how we act in an office space versus how we act at home. So it's really thinking about the day-to-day behaviors of human beings. And that has fed a lot into my work as a content designer and within design as in itself. So that's one of the very first parts of how I linked theater into content design. But my first job outside of university was actually in marketing. So some of you may have heard of Gulf Photo Plus. It's a gallery and photo studio in Al Sakal Avenue. And I worked here as a marketing coordinator. And a lot of the internships I had actually done in university had also been in marketing. So it kind of made sense for me to go into marketing after I graduated. And here I was doing things like social media. I started with CRM campaigns, so that's emails and push notifications, those kind of things, SMS, and like started to touch on advertising as well a little bit too. And then I continued my marketing career in Munch On. It was first called Lunch On when I joined. It's a startup and now actually has been acquired by Kareem, I think last year. It was a food delivery app and website where you could order lunch basically for a reduced price of 25 dirhams if you paid a subscription. So I was still in a marketing position here. I worked from marketing coordinator and I worked my way up to a marketing manager within the 2 years that I was there. But here I also started to do what is maybe more traditionally content design work, but I didn't know I was doing content design work. It kind of was one of the many things I was managing as one of the sole marketing people in a startup company. So here I was working again on CRM campaigns, but I was working from end to end, right? So I was thinking about what the message we're going to send, why we're sending it, what's the goal of the message, what comes before the message, like what's the journey of the user at this point, and then actually building that CRM flow on the CRM platform that we're using, which was called Web Engage. So really an end-to-end journey to when they're actually opening the email and clicking an action. So this is kind of when I was like, oh, there's a whole journey behind this, not just these social media posts or ad campaigns that kind of are like singular. It was really thinking about the journey and the user experience. And this was also the first time that I actually started working on an app. So I'd worked on website copy before, but never on an application. So here we had the website and the app, and I was actually doing UX writing, even though it wasn't called that when I was working here. And this is kind of when I started to learn both through on the job and then also just being interested in it outside of work, learning about UX, UX writing, and how it all feeds together into a user journey. And this is kind of where the transfer happened from marketing to content design. So I then joined another startup called Husby. It's a prop tech startup. I was there for 2 years, and I worked primarily on the agent app. There are 3 kind of streams to Husby. There's the mortgage side, the agent side, and the customer-facing side. I was more primarily on the agent side, but I did work across all at some point at my time there. And how the transfer kind of happened is that I actually still started in a marketing role. I started as a marketing manager, but the way that the company was deciding how to do design and how to build products, they actually brought on Greta van der Merwe, who is an incredible content designer. And a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you today has come from her, has been learnings that I've learned from her directly. And she came in to Husby as head of content design. And she saw the work that I was doing and was like, you're kind of falling under, the work that you're doing actually falls under content design. If we reframe kind of that thinking a little bit, we learn, if you learn a couple tools and kind of expand your knowledge a bit more on UX, I think you're going to be a content designer. Which I was like, amazing. That sounds exactly what I love about the stuff that I was doing in marketing. The stuff I hated, I didn't have to do anymore. The stuff I loved, I got to do in so much more depth. And really build on that knowledge. So Husby was when I really started my content design career and actually where my job title changed. And you'll see in content design too, it's really interesting that there isn't really ironically, a consistent naming convention across companies and teams and regions. So you'll hear people say UX writer, content designer, content strategist, UX content strategy, UX content design. And a lot of the time, the job responsibilities are very similar across all these titles. And the focus is maybe more, so for example, UX writing could be more on the end part of the content design, which is the writing part. But at the same time, you could be called a UX writer and do the exact same job that I'm doing as a content designer. So just be a little bit careful about the terminology. They can mean the same thing across, but they can also mean slightly different things too. But I think content design is kind of where we're falling as a community. We're kind of landing more on content design as a terminology. And that leads me to where I am today, which is Talabat. I think this is my 5th or 6th month now at the company, and I'm a content designer here too. And right now I'm kind of focusing on the food delivery part. So that's the food meals side. Rather than groceries or pharmacy or flowers, the other verticals that we're also targeting as Talabat. And also I've been working heavily on the B2B side, so that's working with the businesses that we work with, which are the restaurants and stores. So that has been a really interesting journey. And I'll talk a bit more about some examples as I go through. But you've heard me say content design probably 100 times since I've started this presentation. So I'm going to really dive into what is content design. And it's interesting, when I was building this presentation, it's hard to articulate the depth of content design, and also it can be so many different things, right? So I'm going to give you kind of a broad overview of the key parts of content design. And then I'll also share some resources with you if you want to dive deeper into particular parts too. So diving right in, can you imagine Talabat or whatever your preferred app of choice is without words? can you imagine trying to navigate this, trying to find where you want to go, trying to find how to subscribe to Pro, or how to get your groceries, or how to order flowers? Navigation becomes really hard when you remove those words, right? But content design actually goes beyond the words. So it's not about plug and play. It's not about just adding words into the screen. It's about thinking about why we're choosing that word for that moment, in that instance, in that place on the screen. Why not another word? Why not a symbol instead of a word? Should it be a button, or should it be a hyperlinked text, or should it be a header or a subheading? So there are a lot of things we think about beyond just what words we're putting onto a screen. But our role as content designers is really to guide the user through the experience as easily as possible. So we're there basically to hold the hand of the user through the experience of using whatever app that we're working on. And then this is kind of where the difference between UX writing and copywriting falls, right? So a lot of the time there's a confusion between, oh, but you're a copywriter, you're just writing copy for a product rather than for an ad. But the difference for writing for, one of the main key differences, I think there are a lot, but one of the main key differences is that for UX writing, which is what we do within content design, is that our goal is to guide the user through the experience. The goal of copywriting is normally to acquire a user, or to influence a user's decision in order to do something. So the style of writing is very different, and the goal is very different too. So the way I'm going to explain to you content design is actually through one of Sarah Winter's quotes, which I think is the perfect encapsulation of what content design is. And Sarah Winters is the founder of Content Design London, which is a company that does content design work. And also she worked on the gov.uk website, which is one of the biggest content design challenges. And she's done an incredible job, and it's kind of the basis of a lot of what content design is. So she's really the authority on content design. She also wrote this amazing book. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Content Design, where a lot of this information has come from. So I really recommend getting that book. Or also she has a lot of articles online too on gov.uk, where she talks about content design, what it is, how it works. She also shows amazing case studies too. So I'm going to dive into this quote. So content design is about using data and evidence to give the audience what they need at a time they need it and in a way that they expect. So what does this mean? We're going to dive into each section by itself and kind of pull out what that means for content design. So data and evidence. This is research and discovery. So as a content designer, as any designer, we should have every decision that we make guided by data and evidence. We shouldn't just decide because it looks pretty or because it sounds nice that that's the reason we're doing it. That can be a part of the decision, but there should be some data and evidence to back up that reason. And the type of research we do really depends on the project. So that can be data audits, content audits, usability tests, competitor research, benchmarking, user interviews, card sorting. I think in this picture you can see this is a really scrappy test that we ran with some agents in Husby when I was working there. We were launching a new feature and we needed the agents to provide feedback and give some quick card sorting advice for us. So this was a really cool way to you can really do it really scrappily in-house. With different companies, I've had different resources for how much research we can do or with what resources we have available to us. But I think there's no excuse not to do research, whether that's literally you as the content designer picking up the phone and calling 10 users. There's always a way to get it done. Now I'm lucky to work at Talabat, where we have a team of UX researchers, which is incredible. And we work closely with them on projects. And also they can guide us to help us do the research by ourselves too. So this research kind of feeds into these key points. So it helps us understand what they need. And this is the user needs, which is one of the most important things for us as content designers, because for us, the user need always comes first. You shouldn't just be solving something that you don't know why you're solving it. And that's not to say that business needs aren't equally as important, but they should feed into each other. So a business need should feed into a user need too, ideally, and in most cases it does. So for example, if you take Talabat, say our business need is hypothetically to grow orders this month. Like that's the business need. They've told us we need to grow orders. But the user need won't sound like I want to order more, right? But it might be, if we use the user story framework, maybe the user need will be something like, as a busy person with an office job, I want to be able to find my easy lunch options so that I can order quickly and without hassle. So those two things may sound different, but they actually result in the same thing, more orders. If we can help that user solve their problem of being able to quickly find a lunch option because they're busy, they have a limited time, they don't want to scroll forever, maybe they'll order more, right? So you can kind of solve business needs with user needs too. They tie together normally. So we use this framework, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but it's a user story framework, which is which is a person in a particular role. I want to perform an action or find something out so that I can achieve my goal. And through the research and discovery that we do, we can create these stories and start to understand the user need. And from that, then we can build out solutions, right? We never want to start with a solution because it kind of pigeonholes you in that, and it stifles your thinking. And you might end up not even solving the pain point in the first place. So user needs are really important. And then the next step is at the time they need it. So this is thinking about the user journey. So nothing happens in isolation. You don't just magically appear on the last screen of an order flow. You've had to go through different screens before then to get to that point. So understanding the end-to-end flow, the end-to-end journey of a user, and how they got to where they are now and what will be their next step from that is really important, because mapping this journey really helps us to understand what the user's motivation is, why they're there, what they're trying to do. How much information they can take in at this point. Maybe they've already had to learn something heavy already, and this actually information isn't important for them at this point. This information can come later, and we don't overwhelm them with all the information at one point. And also, how much work is it for the user to get to a result? I think I just had a really frustrating experience. I'm sure you've all had them too. I won't name the app, but I was trying to get some work done on an apartment, and I had to go through the app of that specific apartment. And to do it, it was so much work. I had to go through like 20 steps to book an appointment. And I had to upload files, but then I also had to type in the numbers from those files. It's kind of that thing like when you apply for a job and you upload your CV, but you still then need to write out your whole CV. This is a really bad user experience, right? Because it takes so much work for you to do the action. So if we can kind of understand the user journey, either we can break up that work, or we can understand how we can make that work easier for them. For example, in this use case, if I'm uploading the file already, I could suggest as a content designer that actually, instead of getting them to type in the number, we should try and search for a technical implementation that will help us pull those numbers directly from that PDF or whatever it is to take that work from the user. That's content design too. It doesn't necessarily have to be the words. It can be a solution that is actually technical. It can be a solution that is design-based, like product design-based. It can be a solution that is user research-based. So it's also thinking about that beyond that. And then the journey mapping also helps us get the information that they need at the point that they need it. There's no point telling them a really vital point of information at the beginning of the flow, and they're going to have to remember it 10 screens later when they're filling out at the checkout, right? So user journey mapping really helps us find the right place to give the right information at the right time. And then the last point is in a way that they expect it, right? So we know what the user needs, we know when they need it and where they need it, but in what way do they expect it, right? So this is thinking about the channel that we use and the language and the tone that we're using. So the channel can look different across different projects, across different apps, across different companies. But this could be, for example, for a content designer, this could be within the app itself or website. It could be a transactional email or transactional push. It could be an SMS or even help center content. And even beyond help center content, it could be things like scripts for agent call centers to read from when answering queries. And then there are channels outside of our realm of expertise, but that doesn't mean that we can't suggest solutions, if that's the best solution, to maybe do a marketing campaign. And in that case, we actually partner with our marketing stakeholders to pass that work on to them to kind of align on that together. Or maybe it's a finance thing and we have to align with finance on it. So the channel really depends on the project, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be the one implementing it if it's outside of our scope, but we can pass that on to the relevant stakeholders. And I think a fun example of something I worked on Talabat recently, a new feature that went live a couple of months ago, was the favorites. And you can now add favorites in your app. So say you always order from Zata with Zait, you click the heart button and it saves it into your favorites list, so you can easily find it again. So the messaging for this goes across multiple screens and has multiple different touch points, because the message for each point is different. You're looking for something different at each stage. So for example, if you see here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the add to your favorites section is actually when you're in the screen itself, you're in the favorites screen on the app itself. And it's kind of a tutorial of how to use this fun way to add favorites to your list. It kind of has like the Tinder swipe model. It's a fun feature. If you haven't tried it, I recommend you trying it. It's really fun and useful. And then some other touch points that we had for this, since it was a new feature, we also decided that we should have a tooltip. So when you're on the menu page, you can actually see a tooltip that will show once or twice and then won't show again. But it's basically a little bit of an explainer of what the new heart icon is. And then we also worked alongside marketing. So this is kind of where you reach out to your stakeholders. So I went to the marketing team our product team went to the marketing team. I was like, we launched this new feature. We'd love to push it a little bit further to get some more people to acquire it. Can we work with you on a CRM campaign? So here you can see a push that we did as a joint collaboration with marketing too. And then this is the language and tone. And this, I think, this last screen here is, I think, what most people think the whole of content design is, or UX writing is. It is a crucial part of it, but it really is 5%. So the language and tone is incredibly important because we need to be consistent, we need to be clear, we need to be concise, because this really builds trust with our user. And I'm a really big believer in that quality and consistency is a big driver of trust, and that trust then corresponds in the success of the business. It translates in more orders, it translates in more buys, it translates in whatever it is you're trying to do. It may not be so obvious, which is why I think sometimes we have to fight for user experience in general in companies. And I think a lot of companies are now getting better at understanding the importance of building trust and how trust is built through good user experience, through good design, through good use of language and tone. And here you can see how it works a little bit. So through the research, we're also looking at how our users are speaking or how they want to be spoken to, what their reading level is, how they're reading, how long they're spending on a page. So through the research, we're also doing like language research too. And it's really important that we're using language, and I'm speaking about language beyond just the language like English or Arabic. That's another important part about localization, but about languages and terminology, the words we're using. And I think a good example here is that I was working on a verification flow for Talabat for adding a number. You have to add a number to place an order. And the original copy for the screen had as a secondary call to action, if you wanted to change your number, if you noticed a mistake in the number that was there, you could modify that number, right? So here it says modify. But that's kind of a complicated, jargony word, right? If you think about users' reading ability, how they read, and the level of reading ability, so it's really crazy to think about, but even in the US, which is predominantly English-speaking country as a first language, and they overall have a reading level of about a grade 8. So the reading level is pretty low. Same in the UK. And if you think about the regions that we're working in, Talabat is across 8 or 9 countries, and we have different languages. We have Arabic, Kurdish, and English. when we're writing in English specifically too, the English is often the second language, third or fourth language of some people who are using the app. So it's really important that we always use simple language to not alienate or confuse our users. And that goes the same for writing in predominantly English-only speaking countries like the UK or the US. I would suggest the exact same change of the screen for those countries too, because modify is not commonly known. It's not one of the words that you learn early on when you're learning English, whether that's your only language or your second or third or fourth. But the word edit is extremely simple. It's used across many different areas. You'll read it in many different places. It's probably a word that you'll learn pretty early on. And it's very easy to understand what's happening. So there's a lot of thought that goes into each word that we put onto a screen. And it's a lot about context. It's a lot about who the user is, the user needs, and the user journey too. So they all tie in together. And then the other important thing that I want to bring up here is voice and tone. So most companies will have a voice and tone guideline. And I know there's normally quite a lot of confusion about the difference between what voice is and what tone is. So a really easy way to remember it is that voice is always consistent. So Talabat should always sound the same. Like you should always know that you're on a Talabat screen. Like the voice should always be consistent. But the tone should change depending on where you're at in the journey, the emotion that you're feeling, what is happening. So for example, if for whatever reason an order was cancelled and we had to do a pop-up message that tells the user, or an SMS that tells the user that the order was cancelled, the tone that I'm using is going to be very different than the tone that I use if it's a celebratory message to say that they won an iPhone in a campaign, right? So these two experiences, they'll still be spoken in the voice of Talabat. It should be clear. It shouldn't be in my voice. It shouldn't be in the other content designer's voice or the product designer's voice, whoever's writing that content. It should be in the voice of Talabat, but the tone should be relevant to the experience. And it's really about empathizing with our user. If you're thinking about when you're really hungry and you're trying to order something and you get an error message, you're really frustrated, right? You're super annoyed, you're hungry, you're maybe late for your meeting, you need to order something. If the error message that pops up is a pun or is a bad joke or is just insensitive, it's going to make me more angry as a user. But if I can regulate the tone as a content designer, as a UX writer, I can regulate that tone to empathize with the user and hopefully provide them a solution that helps them move on with their journey and kind of calms them in a way. Whereas if we're giving them a great message like the delivery is free for this order, maybe a pun is right for that moment. Maybe we can make a joke because the user is in a different mood. So these are all things we think about when thinking about language and tone. And then after you've done all that work, all that research, all that thinking, all that discovery, all that mapping, that's when you can start the creation work. So this is like ideating, solutionizing, and only now should you really be starting to think about those kind of things. And this doesn't happen, again, in isolation. We work a lot with many different stakeholders. And again, it depends on the project and also the way that you as a company have organized your design and product and tech team. But for example, in Husby and in Talabat, I work within a squad. So I work with a product manager, with product designer, and with engineers. And then there are UX researchers who we can pull in for different projects. And then we can always obviously go out further beyond our squad and go to marketing, sales, finance, tech, whatever it is. And it's really important that we're involving different people because everyone has different perspectives. And also a lot of the work of a content designer is stakeholder management. Because a lot of the time, because we're a kind of a horizontal team, we work across maybe many different projects, whereas a lot of the time product designers will be product design and product managers will sit within one team and they'll only work within that one team. We work within multiple teams across. So we kind of have a broader view of the experience as a whole, which is really good for keeping consistency across. And it also means that we have to align between different product managers. So one product manager in one squad and another product manager. I think an interesting one recently was that in the menu page in Talabat and in the homepage of the food, we were going to kind of have the same feature created, very similar one. And because I worked with both of those teams, I was able to be like, oh, have you talked to this product manager? They're doing something really similar. And I think we should align not only the copy, but also the design and how the experience functions as a whole. So even just seeing that these links is really important for like stakeholder management. And then, of course, there's always getting buy-in. I think we mentioned a bit really, earlier in the school, but like about the politics of a workplace. There is a point where sometimes that you just have to get people to buy into your idea. And you can do that by stakeholder management. So this is doing workshops with key stakeholders, presenting your research with the data to back it up, to really get buy-in on those things. And I can't stress how important having data to back up your solutions and your ideas is, which is why the research part and the discovery part is so important. Because if you really want to get buy-in from business stakeholders, they want to see the data. So this is a part where the creation starts, but also it can be a part where we're ideating amongst different stakeholders, we're getting buy-in from different stakeholders. So as you can see, content design takes many different forms. It's not just the words, although words are extremely important, but content design can take many different forms. I think a good example of this is the project I'm currently working on at Talabat. Is actually for the business to business side, the B2B side, where I'm working with the restaurants. And I've been working on this project for 3 months, and only in the last week have I touched any words. So a lot of it has been research. A lot of it has been opportunities that are within design that I've suggested. So for example, it's like adding notifications or adding a search function. So these things don't actually have that many words to them, but they have an impact, right, on the user experience, on the user journey, and helping to find the information that they need as quickly and as easily as possible. And then a lot of that work has also been creating an information architecture. So this is building out flows of how that journey looks like for the vendors, how they get from A to B in the easiest way possible to reduce contact rate, right? So I haven't really touched any writing for this project in 3 months. But a lot of work has been done and a lot of things have been actioned. So it's not necessarily that content design has to result in words on a page. It can result in functionality, it can result in information hierarchy, it can result in flows, it can result in having like tables created, videos, infographics, whatever it is, however you can imagine it, whatever the best way to get that information or to help the user on the journey, that's what we're there to do. So that's what we're there to try and achieve. And then the work is never done, as you guys also know in design. Just because it's gone live does not mean it's finished. We test and we iterate continuously, and we're always learning and we're always tracking that data. Again, the data is a really important part here, because it then helps us to then make the next decision. Okay, so we did this test, we weren't successful. Here's why, here's what the numbers are showing us, here's what the user research is showing us, here's what the card sorting exercise that we did shows us. Okay, slice 2 of this project is going to look like this because of X, Y, and Z. And this is continuous. And then I'll just end up this section about what exactly is content design and move on to a little case study. But I wanted to cap it off with this Venn diagram, which is done by Joe Dimbley. Which is my favorite, actually, representation of what content design is, because I've just talked for like, what, 20 odd minutes about what content design is, and it only really touched the surface, which is why I really want you guys to like read the book and do some research online yourself too. But this, I think, encapsulates everything that a content designer does and is. So you can see that it has copy, which is like the writing part of it. It has UX, the user experience, like the flow, the journey, and then it has the strategy, thinking about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're going to do it. But then you also have the creativity. We're still designers. We're still thinking outside of the box. We're still hoping to create moments of delight. We also have the emotional intelligence side, which is the empathy. We're really thinking about how the user feels at each stage of the journey and then how to meet them where they are at that point. And then we have the logic. Which is thinking, about the data, why we're doing it, how we're going to do it, is feeding into the strategy again. So I like this as it kind of rounds off this experience as a content designer. But in a more tangible way, I'll show you a case study It's actually really hard to find a case study that I can show publicly, because a lot of the work I do is either has been business to business, which I can't share publicly, or is with Talabat that has been recently done, which is not live yet or fully tested. So I found one that I think will be good to kind of show what I've been talking about here. And it's actually an account deactivation flow that I worked on for Husby on the Agents app that they have. Don't worry about reading this one yet. I'll show the full flow on the next screen, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of context first. So this app was used by agents in order to send mortgage leads to Husby. And agents in the UAE, so this is, I'm talking about real estate agents, sorry to be more clear. Real estate agents, they change companies really often in the UAE. So every 3 to 6 months, say, one agent will move from one company to the next company. Super common, it's just like the user type that they are. So one of the technical limitations that we had from our side, and obviously we're always working within technical limitations, another thing that you have to learn when you're working in tech, that there always is going to be some type of limitation that you have to work around. One of the limitations here is that in order to, you couldn't just change your company name in the app, you actually had to delete your account and recreate it, which is not the ideal experience, but as a MVP of the product, it's what we had to work with. So how can we make this experience as good as possible with content design, is what the goal was kind of within the limitation. And the problem was that, okay, so we already have that it's not a great experience. Like, there's already a bad thing about it already. But the problem of it was that these real estate agents, every time they needed to move a company, instead of going through the app to do it, which would have been a 2-click solution or 1-click solution, should have been super easy. They were actually just calling their account managers for help, talking to them on the phone, being like, I tried to do it on the app, it didn't work, I don't know how to do it, I don't get it, just do it for me. And then the account manager would then have to go to the product team and be like, this agent at this company needs to change to X agency, can you do it? And then product would have to go to the tech team and be like, can you create a request to do this on the back end to delete their account? So it created, like, instead of a one-step solution, it involved like 3 different teams. It wasted a lot of people's time when that wasn't their main job, right? So we needed to make this work. So this was the before. So this is the not ideal state, how it was provided. And we did the research that we did here. We actually did, I did some user calls. I literally called people who were trying to delete their account and asked them what they were struggling with, what the process was like, really open-ended questions just to kind of get an understanding of the journey, and kind of ask them to walk me through how they thought they should do it. And it became very clear that there were key problems. And we could also look at this through Looker, looking at the data on the product. So how long people were spending on each screen, how many people were clicking the buttons, how many people were navigating back from the screen, or using also UX Cam to see like heat map, basically like heat map tracking where people are scrolling, where people are touching, and where people are like rage tapping. I don't know if you know that term, but it's like when you're really frustrated with an app and you're just like, nah, you're like really hitting the screen. So we use all that data. We kind of got the user stories. We know the user journey. We can see the problems. We know the business need, and we know the user need, most importantly. So here you can see we dive into the copy of this. First of all, if you just look at the page as a whole, it's really intimidating. There are 3 paragraphs and then these 2 random little bullet points at the bottom. And then if you look at the actual content itself, first of all, the leaf name is called delete account. And then underneath we have, do you really want to delete your account, as the header, and it's a question. But we've given them no way to answer this question. There's no yes or no button. It's just like a floating question. And it's one of these things like, I think that people think that they should ask a question, but it's actually better to be straightforward with a statement. So, and then after that we go into, and also a big thing here is that this flow actually isn't deleting your account, it's actually requesting a deactivation. So this was one of the major things that we saw in the user research, is that they thought that by going through this flow, because of the content, they thought that going through this flow, they were deleting their account. but actually you can't delete it here. There has to be a request process due to legal reasons, because they have pending commission. So for legal reasons, it has to be a request deactivation. So already our terminology is wrong. We're misleading our user. And then here we have a fluffy intro, which adds no value. You'll see it in every app. We'll see you, we hate to see you go. For one, it kind of falls dead because you're using an app. Do you really think that this user hates to see you go? Probably not. And then secondly, for this use case, we hate to see you go. We actually know that most users are coming back. So it doesn't really make sense in this context either. And it's repeating the same content as above. And then we also have some details that are not super accurate in there and are kind of confusing. And then the key part, the most important information that they really need to know is right at the end in these two little bullet points. And they're really the most important things of this whole process that they really need to know. It's like crucial information. And we know that through setting UX reading patterns, and I want to first dispel the myth that people don't read. People do read, they just read in very specific ways. So people scan, they scan in the F pattern and they scan in the Z pattern, right? So if I was to read this in the F pattern, I would see just the header and maybe the first couple words of 2 or 3 of these, or 1 or 2 of these paragraphs, right? So I wouldn't even see that most important information. And then you see the CTA, which again is another big point here. For one thing, it has 2 actions on one button, which is a big no-no, because confirm and continue, like what is happening when I press this button? I don't know. And this is actually quite a big action to take, so it should be super clear. And then the second CTA is cancel, but there is technically nothing to cancel because I haven't deleted my account yet. The action of this button is actually going back. So as you can see, there's a lot of confusion on this page. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of information, and it's really not clear, and it's really not helping the user get to where they need to go, which is our job as a content designer. And then when they say they get through and they decide, okay, confirm and continue, they get to the next flow and it says request received. But nowhere on the previous slide have we said that it's going to be a request. We've told them that it's going to be deleting your account. So here it's super confusing. There has no previous knowledge of this request received, but they've just created an action, and now they're getting a different success message. And then there's nowhere to go if you get help. So say I accidentally click this, or now I'm like, oh, request received, what does that mean? I need some help. There's no way for them to access help here on this screen. There's just like, okay, or go back. So what do? We take all this information that we know, we take the current state, we take all the user research, the user journey, the user interviews, and we use our key like core content design UX writing principles here. So what we've done, oh, and also I just want to point out that there are still some things that can be improved on the screen. This was the first slice, and I actually left after this project. I moved to Talabat after this, so there are more iterations that I would do to this, and I'll point them out too. But I thought it was fun to kind of see how even after the first iteration, there are still things that need to be improved. So what we did was we really simplified the heading, and we made it accurate to what is happening, deactivating your account. And it again matches with request account deactivation. We're highlighting that it's a request and that it's an account deactivation. We're then explaining exactly what that means right at the top. And it's sectioned by this, so I know what's going to be under here. And then we've pulled out as another header some important things to know. So even if I'm only going to scan this page, I'm only going to read the F pattern, right? So I'm going to read deactivating your account, maybe a little bit of that bit, but probably I'll read some important things to know. And I'll know, okay, if I'm really going to commit to this request deactivation, I should probably read the points below. And then the way that we listed these points was in order of importance based on our user research, right? So we knew that it was really important that our users wanted to know whether they were going to get their commission if they delete their request or not. So the information hierarchy was done based on the user research. Really clearly laid out, bullet points is a really great way to break up information, especially when it's important and it needs to be stated. And then the other really big thing that we did here was, you can see the button, the color changed to red because it's an action that's going to have a big effect, right? It's something that you should be thinking about, right? And then we changed the button name from confirm and continue to request deactivation, because that's exactly what is going to happen when I click on this button. It's super clear what's going to happen. And then the second button, the second CTA is go back instead of cancel, because you're not canceling anything here. The action of this button is actually to go back one page. But I would say two things to note on this page that I still think are not ideal. So if you see here, consistent terminology. So we're saying deactivate your account, but then in the second sentence, we're saying request to delete your account. We shouldn't say delete if we're actually using the terminology deactivation. So that's one thing I would pull out as an improvement to be made on the screen still. And then a design point would be that this bin icon here, or this garbage can icon, is normally associated with deleting. But because this is a request deactivation, I would argue that there would probably be a better icon that we should use. Maybe there isn't, and maybe we shouldn't use an icon, but I would work with the designer to explore different options for this. Okay, so we made it through the first screen. We get to the second screen. We decided to request deactivation. So now it's clear. Okay, I get request received. I got it. Makes sense. We've also been a little bit clear about what's going to happen after 48 hours. And then I think the big thing here is that we've given them another option to get help. So they don't have to go out and then go into the chatbot. They can directly contact their account manager from the screen if they changed their mind or made a mistake. So I think here it's really a great example of trying to solve a user and a business need through content design. Even though this one's primarily focused on UX writing, but it really feeds into the content design framework. And always important, the results. Whilst I can't tell you specific numbers, but I can tell you that there was a significant drop in account manager requests for deactivating accounts on behalf of their agents. So this reduced time that the account managers were spending dealing with requests that they shouldn't have been dealing with in the first place, that could have been done through the app. And we also saw less complaints through customer service and through reviews about it being hard to deactivate account, which we were seeing quite frequently. So these small changes, we didn't do anything drastic really. We just cleaned up the information hierarchy. We improved the copy. We spoke in the right language with the right tone. We were very clear and we were consistent, although we could be more consistent. And we edited the design a bit to reflect that too. So these small changes can make a big impact. And also, whilst they seem small, it actually takes a lot of work to get here, to find out what they need, why they need it, and how they need it. So I've done a lot of talking. I would love to hear from you guys if you have any questions, whether it's about content design or about my work history. I would love to hear from you guys. Maybe I'll also stop sharing my screen so I can see you.
Well, thank you, Henrietta. This was amazing. I can't say how lucky we are to have this talk with real industry experience. Hello, student. Now is the time to talk. Anybody has a question, maybe about the tools they use, or if they use Agile in their company and how they do interact with the other team members? How do you interact with the programmers? What are the typical flashpoints?
Yeah. I can target those. I think the two main questions there were the tools and how we interact with engineers and programmers. So the first one, tools. We basically use all the same tools that the product teams use. We're very much integrated into the product team. So for example, I sit within the content design, which sits within design, which sits within product, right? So I have key project areas, although I work horizontally across multiple teams, but I'll work on specific projects that are team-based, for example. So say I'm working on one screen in the app that is relevant to one product squad. I'll work closely with that product manager, that product designer, the engineers of that squad as a team. So I'll join their stand-ups. I'll be part of the design sprint. My work will be listed on their Jira board. So we use a mixture of different things. Some teams use Jira, some teams use Trello. It's kind of based on how the team is functioning. We are different across. Mm-hmm.
And Henrietta, what tool do you find yourself using the most? Because if I'm a programmer, I'm using some coding editor, maybe GitHub and Jira, I guess. But what about you?
So for me, I use mostly, I'm a big fan of Miro. So I use that a lot for like workshopping and ideation and pulling in research and kind of like synthesizing research there. So Miro is a big one for me. I also use Figma. So it's really important that we work in parallel with with product designers on the design screens themselves. So it's not that I write in a Google document and then they copy and paste into Figma. It's really a joint working scenario where we're both working into the same frames, because it's really important that to see the writing and the information hierarchy, and whether it's a header or a subheader, we need to see it on Figma, right? To see if it fits, to see how it aligns, to see if it makes sense as a header or not. So we work directly in Figma for a lot of that, and a lot of the time we have our own content design space within each Figma file for each product team. And then I personally and my team, we use Trello a lot to organize projects, and because it's one of the most common tool used across the team, so it's good actually for alignment. And then we also use like Google spreadsheets. I think it's a really good way for one, obviously data, but then also for keeping guidelines and glossaries and tracking content audits. So doing content audits in Google Docs or spreadsheets really makes it clear, like on what leaf is the content and then what is the data that's relevant to that. It's not the prettiest, but it works. And it's also shareable across. Yeah, I don't like writing in Excel or Google Sheets, but it really is a good tool for getting like information architecture, so flows and tracking content.
I use FigJam for information architecture, but maybe it's not so efficient, right?
FigJam is good. I actually use, so if I'm doing for the first stage of information architecture, so one of the projects I'm working on now was big on information architecture. I spent the last 2 months designing a new information architecture for the help center for our restaurants, so the B2B side. And I actually mapped all the information on Miro. So I did the flows through Miro, which is very similar to FigJam, like the structure. And then my next step is actually to put it on, because the team that I work with specifically for this works with Excel sheets mostly, because they're technical. So Figma and Miro are not native to them, right? So I'm actually going to translate it into an Excel sheet so that they can go in and see, okay, yeah, so this is leaf 1, and this has 2 leaves in it, and then it goes into 3, and it goes into the next 2. So it's kind of aligning with how your stakeholders are working, too, is a big part of it. Yeah, and making sure it's shareable and easily understandable.
Excellent. Super interesting. Do we have any questions from the students? Abdul Rahman, Saif, Sultan, Ayesha? No? Okay. Yes? No? Okay. I think the students are shy today. Well, thanks a lot, Henrietta. Yeah.
If you have questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, or if you just want to talk to me, please add me on LinkedIn. I also share some articles about content design on there too, and I would love to talk to you further. So keep in contact. I'd love to learn more also about your design journeys too.
Excellent. Let's give it a claps to Henrietta.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Henrietta. I'll see you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.